Hi, everybody. Amy. Oops. Hi, everybody. This is Amy Keefner. Today, I am interviewing my friend Susan Wyneken, who is a social worker by schooling and then transferred into senior living sales. So we're going to talk about what it's like to be studying social work and senior living at the same time. So thank you, Susan, for joining me today.
Thank
How
you
I'd
for
like to
having me.
start is how you went into deciding that you wanted to graduate with a degree in social work. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, I think I knew at an early age that I wanted to help people. I mean, that's, I think, common for a lot of us. And so there were a lot of careers that I considered: education, uh, psychology, child psychology, nursing. And I worked at a children's hospital while I was kind of in school part-time, and was kind of inspired by a social worker I worked with there. And she convinced me that I could do what I wanted to do by getting a degree in social work. At that point, I had landed on child psychology, and she knew and thankfully influenced me to change that up and go into social work and still be able to do what I wanted to do.
When you were in school for it, were you passionate about it too, where all the classes that you were taking, like you really held your attention and you were excited to be learning it?
I definitely was. I mean, the schooling that I had was so diverse. The students were diverse, the courses, learning how to facilitate groups, um, learning about just acceptance and intolerance and all of these things that meant so much to me. And yes, we worked in groups, we worked solo, we presented, and I just for me, I was passionate about all of it. Yes.
And if I understand, social work has different flavors to it, right? So can you explain a little bit about what social work is and then what types of fields people can go into with that degree?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of social work one way. They think of um, working with people who need financial assistance, which is definitely a part of it. But it is broad. There are so many things. You can work in a school as kind of a school counselor, if you will. You can work in a hospital. Um, as a discharge planner. A lot of nurses do that too, but social workers as well. You can work in different medical fields. I worked in hospice, for example, and back in the day in HIV and AIDS. Um, so there's a broad thing. It's emotional support. It's sometimes financial support. And yes, you can go into private practice, in fact, doing one-on-one counseling, couples counseling, family. So lots of different things you can do with it.
Where did you spend the majority of your time in your social work job?
In my career,
Mhm.
I started in HIV and AIDS. That was in the mid '90s, and it was an interesting and difficult time for that disease in those days. Not that it still isn't a challenge, but very, very different today. And then in hospice later. So always kind of with that um, end of life in mind.
Mm.
So.
What about then social, because that touches on something that's got to be very difficult to be surrounding yourself around challenging lives, right? Or the end of life or a disease. So how
Right.
do you emotionally deal with that?
People used to say to me the same thing, how do you do that? I couldn't do that. And maybe that's true. I don't think that everyone can, but I also don't think I can't be a middle school principal. No. Um, so I suppose part of it is just a person who can handle that. For me, it was rewarding. It There was something about being allowed in someone's life at such a critical time, in a family's life, at a time that is just so very personal. And yes, that, and it was. I while you had boundaries, you can't help but grow close to people. But knowing that you're making whatever time they have better, I guess that's probably the reward, and that's what helped balance it for me, is knowing that I could do it, and I was doing it, and I was helping people by doing it.
And how, at the end of the day, do you go home and separate yourself from what you just experienced that day?
That's a good question. I think it was so long ago. In part of school, you asked about school, part of what we learned was creating boundaries for ourselves and being able to separate it. And so part of that was learned. Part of it was just practice over time, being able to, we took turns being on call. So it wasn't 24/7. And you kind of just had to be able to shut it off. Like I said earlier, you can't help everyone. And even if you work 24 hours a day, you still can't help everyone. So you have to just be able to create that balance. Maybe it's taking a hot bath, maybe it's going to dinner with friends, but being able to, I don't mean shut it off in a cold way, but you kind of have to.
Yeah, and having been around a lot of social workers in my last career, there were so many topics on self-care. I mean, we had webinar after webinar or seminar after seminar about self-care, because I think it's so important, right, for that industry.
Definitely. Well, and even the companies that I worked for, or organizations that I worked for, most, if not all, probably all of them, had internal things too. So we might have memorial services. For when I was in HIV and AIDS, we had a monthly memorial service. We lost a lot of clients during those days, and it was important for us, for our team. It was important to even have that together. But we grieved. We thought so much about the families, and in hospice too, and certainly they took priority, but we had to also acknowledge our own grief and deal with that, whether it was in work or outside of work. So yeah, part of self-care.
Yeah, which touched on, you mentioned earlier that one of the challenges is that you can't help everybody. And I would think that that's kind of a challenge too, that you're going to be dealing with deaths, and that's part of life. But separating that from those people that you get close to, right? And so do you want to touch a little bit on that? Like when you get close to someone in social work, then how do you mentioned schooling and you mentioned these things, but is there anything else that you want to advise anybody listening about?
A story comes to mind years ago when I was in hospice, and there was a couple. The woman was dying, and her husband literally did not know how to work the microwave. And so it was dealing with his emotional needs, but also just practical, like, how is this guy gonna literally live and survive? Because she did everything for him. And it was a couple that I just grew really close to. And I say close with caution, because you still had that boundary. They were still my clients, but it just was a special relationship. And the night that she died, I had dinner plans with my sister and some friends. And my friend made I'm not going to say a joke, but made a remark that I can't remember exactly what she said, but I burst into tears at the restaurant. And she said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. And I didn't mean to be insensitive. I thought you kind of were okay with this stuff, something to that effect. And I was sort of laughing through my tears, and I said, I have good boundaries, but
I'm human too. I'm human. Yes.
Yeah. So you have to also allow that, and allow, sometimes tears. There's a different, even with clients, sometimes you don't bawl with them, you're not going to break down, but I teared up a lot. You have to be human also. I don't know if that answered your question, but
It definitely does. And I think that's part of the beauty too of this job, right? Besides helping people, you do create friendships and loving bonds with people, even with
yeah,
boundaries. But because we're human, you still create.
loving bonds. That's a good way to look at it. It truly was. It was a different kind of bond, and not friendship. Actually, it's different from that. It's not. You don't stay in contact, and that was something you learned in school too. It's like, don't promise that you're going to stay in contact because you can't.
Right.
You won't. I mean, you're going to have, who knows, hundreds, thousands, depending on how long you're in it. You're going to have a lot of people to try and stay in contact with, and it's impossible. So you just don't. That's, your relationship ends.
And that's a part of when you move jobs too. You can't carry those clients with you. So that's another reason why you can't promise it, because you might not be at that job for less than 2 years or something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My first internship was at the Boys and Girls Club. And I remember my field instructor saying toward the end, do not tell these kids you're going to stop in. And I thought, well, I'm going to stop in. Sure, it's so close. Like I live right here. I'm so glad she gave me that advice. I think about those kids still today, and they'd be 35 years old. But yeah, she was right. I didn't make that promise, and I'm glad, because I never went back.
Yeah. And then you're breaking
Right or wrong.
Then you're breaking hearts. No, I was given the same advice. Don't ever say that you're going to come back and visit or anything like that, because life gets in the way. And if you've made that promise, they're waiting for that, and
Yeah.
you can't always.
Yeah.
Tell me what makes a good social worker.
Obviously, compassion, being genuine. One that people don't think of as much is assertiveness. This came in handy when I worked in HIV and AIDS. Many of our clients were dually diagnosed with mental health issues, and very often addiction. And there were lots and lots and lots of manipulative behaviors with addiction. And so assertiveness, did I learn that fast? Because you can be taken advantage of really quickly. So it's balancing that. I think most people think of compassion and bleeding heart, and yes, that's true. You have to have that, but also that ability to be assertive, to set those boundaries. Not every social worker is good at that, and they probably burn out very quickly.
I was just going to say, what is the average length of time that somebody is a social worker?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, a lot of people are lifers, and I think it depends on what field you go into and how you grow. I did it for several years, and as you know, changed my career. But yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Yeah,
I
like
think
you
most
said,
people probably stay in it. That's just a guess, though. I really don't know.
let's talk about why you left. Tell me about that transition.
For me, social work became not challenging enough. I loved what I did and felt rewarded, but my mind didn't feel challenged after a while. I just needed more. And and I had no idea what that more looked like. So as a social worker in hospice, I don't know, do you want me to go ahead and get into kind of where? So when I decided to leave, I did the normal things, looked in the newspaper at the time, circled things with a pen, and sent off my resume. I'm definitely showing my age, but sent off my resume to a lot of different places. And honestly, I can't even remember. I don't know what all I looked at. Some was probably still social work, but I kept thinking about a place that I went where we had patients on hospice. And it was an assisted living building. And the first time I went there, I thought, what on earth is this place? All I knew was nursing homes, what we all think of as like old institutional, blah. And I walk into this place and it looks like this beautiful house with smiling residents, smiling staff members, people having a good time. And I'm in here delivering, support for hospice, and everybody's welcoming me and saying hello and connecting that. I just remembered it. I thought, I got to know more about this place. So I went in with my resume and went up to the concierge to this building. And I said, I'm looking for a career change, and I'd like to talk to somebody about your organizational structure. Probably the boldest move, definitely the boldest move I had ever made in terms of career and all of that. And she had me talk to the salesperson. Now I know that the salesperson gets all the miscellaneous riffraff asking weird questions. But it started on that day, really started me on my path, meeting that salesperson who is a mentor to me still today. Just changed my whole course.
And so you get into you go work for the senior living company. What were you doing for the senior living community?
Sales. So Kelly Jane is the person that I met. She was in the sales role at the community, and I'll just briefly tell you how we even figured out that it ties into social work. Is I think she probably asked me first, well, what is it that you do every day? And I talked to her about identifying needs and asking questions and helping people make decisions and resources, matching them with resources, all of these things. And she's, listening like this, and she said, that's what I do. And it was so cool. This stuck with me too to this day is transferable skills. She saw in me that I had these sales skills. I would have never, even talking to her, I was like, sales, what? I'm no salesperson. I still kind of say that, but the fact that she saw it that way, that she was helping people meet their needs, changed my life. So yes, that's what I did. I got into sales and learned from her, soaked everything up, and that's what I would primarily meet with family members who knew their parent or loved one needed help, couldn't be cared for at home, whatever it may be. And I would talk to them, sometimes for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years, to help them make their decision to hopefully move into our community.
So if I understood your story correctly, there was not a position open and you went in with your resume.
Yes, correct. So lucky for me, Kelly Jane also kind of knew-ish that they were grooming her to be promoted. So she knew at that time that, or at least thought was likely, that she was going to be moving into a bigger role. And so for 9 months, I bugged her. I stayed in touch with her. I went and worked in retail just because I was like, that's my job. I'm taking that job at the minute she's gone. And so I kept in touch with her. And I think it was probably maybe 6 months in, I don't remember the exact timing, but she introduced me to her area sales manager, Farrah Gold, who you know. And who also became a mentor. So yeah, I waited 9 months and bugged them until finally they were ready to promote Kelly Jane and open it up. And so
that's amazing. I mean, that is super cool that you had that tenacity to do that. And back then, there was no real cell phones. I don't even think their email, probably at that point, maybe. But to stay in touch, you had to find creative ways than just
Definitely. Yeah, I probably had email. I'm
Okay.
not that old.
No, I'm trying to think when email really came into play, but yes, I mean, it was.
Yeah, no, I definitely had email, but you're right. It was very different. It wasn't like just a quick text. It was an intentional phone call um, or email, and making sure they knew, hey, listen, I'm still here and I'm still waiting.
In that meantime, did you go look for other communities to see if they had openings, or were you just stuck on this place and these people?
I guess I was, and I can't even tell you why. There weren't that many options, to be honest, at that time. There weren't very many assisted living communities around. This one happened to also be like 2 miles from my house. But I don't even think it was that. I just had such a great feeling. It just felt so right. And yeah.
Let's talk about senior living then. What do you love about being in senior living?
I still believe, even though the industry has changed a bit, a lot, um, I really still, in my heart of hearts, believe that a good, well operated senior living community is probably I'm going to say the best choice for most seniors. Not everyone, but I think I've just seen seniors thrive. And yeah, have I seen some not so great situations? Sure, of course. Are there some communities out there that aren't great? Sure. And even the great ones make mistakes all the time. We're human. But the life that they live and the connections and friendships and we've gotten away from the word socialization, but for this purpose, just all of that. I mean, I just home is not always. It doesn't provide those things. In most cases, it doesn't provide all of those things, and so yeah.
That's, yeah, I can tell you're passionate about it, which I have been too. Thanks to all of you guys, my mentors, and we'll talk about mentorship in a minute. But what is the hardest part about being in senior living, whether it be in sales? Let's talk about sales because that's your position, and yeah.
The hardest part, I think the hardest part in being in sales in senior living, you know what I'm going to say, is when things don't go right. And you don't really, as a salesperson, that is really not within your control. Now, I am not the most patient person by nature. No one would really accuse me of being extremely patient. In some cases, I am with animals and children, but but when something's wrong, I want it fixed. Like I want it fixed now. So early in my senior living career, I had to learn to be patient and to trust. So I guess the hardest part is not being able to control that, to see things that are wrong, to know that it's not perfect, just unrealistic, but to learn that patience and that trust, and to honestly to learn how to ask and how to report back in a way that people can receive it. You know, if I see something that's wrong, it's okay for me to share that. But assuming best intentions was one of the team member credos that has stuck with me. In my first job, it was one of the team member credos of that company, and it sticks with me today. So when I see something wrong, my first thought, I force myself to have my first thought is, listen, that person did not come to work today saying, I'm going to mess up really bad. Right? They came thinking they were going to do a good job, and we're human. And so I think that's probably, that's a lot that I've just said there, but if that makes sense, the hardest part is, yeah, just knowing things are going to go wrong, and figuring out a way to be okay with that and still sell and still, tell families that it's going to be okay.
And I agree. I mean, having been a salesperson in a senior living community, it's happening everywhere. We didn't work for the same company, and it's the same thing and everywhere. And so jumping ship to just go to another community thinking it's going to get better is not the same thing. It is all the same because that's the industry. You know, it's a very tough business for our care partners to do day in and day out. And that's really who carries the company, is those care
That's right.
partners.
Yeah, the frontline caregivers, exactly. And I think when you work for a company that truly values them, gives them a voice, you usually see a better result in terms of care. And that's at least that's what I look for is a company that values them. Pay is not good. I don't know when that's going to change or if, but I don't even know that. I mean, of course, that's critical, but there are a lot of other things too that make somebody feel valued and makes them want to do an excellent job. But partnering, our job in sales is relationships, is a lot of it. Um, and it's internal relationships too, internal relationships with those caregivers, you making them feel valued, and with your operations leaders, your executive director, your nurses, um, feeling like you're working collaboratively toward the same goal, and finding a way, like I kind of said before, finding the right words to share with one another. They may say, "Hey, look it, you're telling them the wrong thing. You're making stuff. You're over promising." Maybe we are, maybe we're not. I really try not to, but how it's interpreted might be different. So just being able to build the trust to have those open conversations and collaboration, I think, helps avoid that worst part of the job.
Agreed. I 100% agree with you. Thank you for sharing that. To wrap up, let's talk about mentorship. You mentioned that you've had a couple mentors, and so how important was that to you? What do those mentors do for you? Are you a mentor now to anyone? That's a lot. That's quite a few questions. Get where I'm going with it. Let's just talk.
I do. Yeah, I'm going to actually start with your last question. Yes, I think that I am. I mean, not in an official capacity that I'm aware of, but yeah, I have a lot of people who worked on my sales teams in the past who still look to me and talk to me when they have questions about their career or difficulties in their communities. And so, as a sales leader over the years, I've consciously, I think it's just innate in me too, but I've consciously said, one of the most important parts of my job as a sales leader is to be that mentor, to be that trusted coach and advisor. And I always want my teams to feel comfortable coming to me. Maybe it's to say, woohoo, look what I did. Maybe it's to say, I am stuck. Can you help me? And having that, I guess that's when I know that I've done my job as a coach and a mentor, is when my teams do that. When they come to me and say, yeah, I don't know if I did this right, or I'm not sure how to do this, and not even necessarily giving them the answer, but helping them get there, just like we do in sales. And so, yes, that was important to me because that's what my mentors did for me, and they groomed me. They saw my potential, probably definitely long before I did, and they nurtured that in me, and it was more important to them, I think, to promote, as in like recognize me and my own growth, than their own, which I think makes a great leader. And I saw that and I felt that, and it's how I continue to grow in my career.
I always think it's neat when someone is referred to as a mentor. So just real quickly to wrap that up then, what made those two people, because you've had probably many leaders and bosses, those two people stick out as being mentors for you, Kelly and Farah?
Yeah, and there are others. They just were my first, and maybe that's part of it. Kelly Jane um, was my area sales manager longer than Farah was, and she and her operations partner, Chris, he died several years ago, but I I think just because it changed my life, I think those three, Farah, Kelly Jane, and Chris, stand out because I mean it literally changed the course of my professional life. I really don't think it would have happened without them. And my first executive director, Cheryl, as well. I could go on. I could name a million people along the way, but they were the first, and they just, I don't know, they made me look at myself differently.
I love that. And I think too, a mentor is someone that you can call today and
Yeah.
ask for advice. Even though you might not work with them, they might not be in the industry, they might work for a competitor, but they're still your mentor because they care enough about you and want to give you the right advice.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if a year or two has passed, and it has at times, you pick up the phone and they're there, and it's like no time has passed. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of mentors. And I think if you can go find one, go find one. Ask someone to mentor you. You don't have to wait for them to be in your life. If you know you want to be in something and they're in it and you know that they're good at it, go ask. Do you mind mentoring me?
Definitely. And actually, I didn't even think to say this. At this, I'll just say that Sunrise, that was the first company that I worked for. And I'm assuming it still exists today, but they had an official mentor program. So in each area of, at that time it was leadership. I think they've expanded it even now, but each region would have a mentor, and I was selected after I'd only been doing my job for a year as a salesperson in the community. You had to do it for at least 1 year. They asked me to be a mentor, so other salespeople at my level, my peers, would call me sometimes for advice, or if they had a question, maybe they weren't quite comfortable taking it to their ED or our area sales manager. So that developed that leadership piece in me too, and just what was another step, along my path.
And the last question is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to either be one, a social worker, and then two, a salesperson, let's just talk salesperson at a senior living community. Let's talk about both of those.
Okay. A social worker. It's actually different today. When I went to school, there was a lot more you could do with a bachelor in social work. Today, you really kind of need a master's degree to do most things. You can do some things with a bachelor degree, but if it's even anything you're considering, or if you're considering psychology, want to be that helping person, a counselor, I think social work is an amazing degree, and I wouldn't even change that for sales. I could go on down that rabbit hole too, because a lot of social workers do not make good salespeople. It comes down to that assertiveness and candor factor, but that's another a whole other conversation. But know that, yeah, with a master's degree, yeah, you can do one-on-one work, and it's a very versatile degree. I still use my social work skills. So yeah, but find a mentor. See if you can even shadow a social worker in their role, in various roles, working with children. If you think you're going to be working with children, you're probably actually going to be working with families. And that that changed how I looked at things. But yeah, think broadly, talk to other social workers, and don't limit yourself, I guess is what I would say. And if you already are a social worker, same thing. Think broadly. Think about those skills that you have that could apply to other things.
You touched on something that is huge for me. I think that if any career, if you think you want to get into it, Surround yourself in that before you decide. Go, like you said, shadow someone, interview a bunch of people in different job opportunities of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just be sure and go do your homework before you decide on this, because social work, especially, very tough, doesn't make a lot of money. You work a lot of hours. You know, there's a lot of things that come with that. So
Right.
do your homework in interviewing people.
Yeah, you can though. I mean, I do want to say you go into private practice, you can do pretty well as a social worker these days. I know that's another thing people think like, and when I was doing it, yeah, I didn't make very much money at all, but there are ways, and but yeah, and now you have so much at your fingertips online. You probably could go online and almost do some shadowing or find some people talking about what they do, a TED talk maybe, or I don't know, but yeah, research that. Senior living sales. What was the question again? What would I tell people trying to get
What's your advice to someone who thinks that they want to get into sales in a senior living community?
um, I think the same thing, visit some, um, challenge your thinking too, because I think naturally most of us think, oh, I want to live, or my parents, my grandparents want to live at home for as long as they possibly can. And I would encourage you to just challenge that, which might be hard if you haven't seen senior living, but ask, what are the social opportunities, and just, see if you can talk to some people in both who have done both of those things. Maybe families who waited too long, longer than they, I tell people all the time, I've never met a family member who moved their loved one in and came back and said, gee, I wish I'd waited. Never, not one time ever. So yeah, talk to some families maybe about how they made their decision. Families who have moved in, what their experience has been like. And think about those transferable skills. If you're doing the sales job right in senior living, you're not hardcore sales. You're getting it done. Like you have a responsibility to revenue for the company. But you can get there with a big heart. You can get there by being compassionate, by being genuine. I, along with many of my peers, have been told multiple times by family members, I moved in because you were genuine, because I believed you, I trusted you, and thank you. That's what you're going for. That's what people need when they're making this emotional, expensive decision. So yes, you're responsible for revenue, but you're doing it for the right reasons. So
you made two great points there. One is, most people think of senior living communities as that nursing home that they visited their grandparents in. Yeah. And like you said, it's changed so much. It is truly a home and a community. And like, there are the ones that are Medicaid communities that aren't as nice as some of the others.
Yeah.
And they still need social workers and salespeople. But it's changed. And don't always think that it's got to be like that place that maybe your grandparents lived in. And two, like you said, I came from a technology sales degree, and I went and worked for a senior living community with no experience being in senior living. It's those transferable skills, the empathy quotient that I had, the desire to help others.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point too. If you think you want to do it, I actually just several weeks ago, a friend said, hey, will you talk to this lady I talked to? I forget what she used to do, and something in property, I don't know, I forget, but nothing related to senior living. And I talked to this lady, and it ended up, it was very different than what she was thinking. And I was helping her recognize these transferable skills. So don't cut yourself off from it because you go, well, I don't have any experience, because a lot of senior living companies will recognize those other skills and that heart and passion for helping people, a lot of them. So.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much, Susan, for educating anyone who thinks they want to go into social work. maybe senior living. I hope it touched one of you, maybe many of you, and we're here if you have any questions. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Amy.
much.
Thank you.